Thanksgiving was always awkward in my family, but that year, it turned into something else entirely. My name's Aaron. I'm 31 now, and for most of my adult life, I've kept things quiet. I've always been the quiet one, the helpful one, the one who never asked for much, just stayed in the background and did what needed to be done. Maybe that was my mistake. I guess when people get used to you being invisible, they start thinking you're not really there. Growing up, my brother Luke was the golden boy. Star quarterback in high school, scholarship to college, business degree. You name it, he had the spotlight. My parents, especially my mom, would light up whenever he walked into a room. "That's my boy," she'd beam, as if she were announcing royalty. Meanwhile, I was just Aaron. I got decent grades, kept to myself, got a job right out of college, and slowly started building a life. Nothing flashy, just solid. But somehow, none of that ever seemed to count. The real kicker? I was the one quietly helping keep everything afloat. My dad had a health scare about 5 years ago and had to cut back on work. The bills didn't stop, of course. So I stepped up, started covering the mortgage, utilities, some of the medical costs. It was never supposed to be permanent. Just something I could do to help, you know? Family takes care of each other. Or at least, that's what I thought. But the longer I helped, the less they seemed to notice. Or maybe they noticed and just decided it was owed to them. Luke never offered a dime. He'd show up on holidays in his newest suit or talking about some conference he'd flown to in Dubai or Toronto, Mom fawning over his every word like he was some corporate messiah. Dad would just nod along, sipping his whiskey, never saying much. And me? I'd usually be in the kitchen, checking the oven, bringing out dishes, helping clean up after. That Thanksgiving started like all the others. I got there early to help Mom prep, even though she barely acknowledged me when I walked in. "The potatoes need mashing," she said by way of greeting. No hug, no smile, just directions. I nodded, as always, and got to work. Luke showed up an hour later with a bottle of wine and a new girlfriend, someone named Danielle who barely looked old enough to drink. Everyone oohed and awed over her while I set the table, ignored in plain sight. Dinner was the usual routine of Mom bragging about Luke's latest big moves, and Luke acting like he invented the concept of work. Danielle laughed at all his jokes, loud and forced, and I just sat there, cutting my turkey into smaller and smaller pieces, chewing slow, staying quiet. Until the conversation shifted. It started with something harmless. Mom mentioned how it must be nice to live alone, implying I had it easy. I made a small joke, said something like, "Yeah, the mortgage fairy sure helps with that," just trying to brush it off. But then she gave me this look, cold and sharp, and said, "You know, Aaron, you've always acted like you're doing us some huge favor. You're not. You're just a burden, always have been." The whole table went silent for half a second. I actually blinked, thinking I'd misheard her. But before I could say anything, Luke chuckled, shook his head, and added, "At least I make this family proud." There it was. That line. That gut punch. Something about the way he said it, so casual, like it was a universally agreed upon fact, like I should already know and accept it. It just made something in me go still. I put down my fork, slowly, pushed my chair back, and stood up. I didn't say a word, didn't throw a fit, didn't even look at any of them. I just walked out, grabbed my coat, got in my car, and drove home. I remember the drive was weirdly quiet. I didn't even turn on the radio. My phone buzzed once or twice, probably text from Mom asking where I went, or maybe Danielle trying to smooth things over. I didn't check. I just drove in silence, parked, went inside, and sat on my couch for a long time, thinking. I thought about every bill I'd paid, every quiet sacrifice, every time I'd been there when they needed something, rides, groceries, last-minute repairs. I thought about how not once had I ever been thanked. Not once had anyone said, "We appreciate you." Instead, I got called a burden right after peeling potatoes for 3 hours and covering their mortgage again. For a while, I wasn't sure what to do. I was angry, yeah, but more than that, I felt numb. Like I just realized something I should have known a long time ago. They didn't see me as part of the family. They saw me as a tool, a utility, a wallet with legs. So I stopped. Cold turkey. No more payments. No more quiet help. No more being the family doormat. I didn't send a message. I didn't explain. I just let it all go, turned off the autopay, deleted the bill reminders from my calendar, and went about my life. Weeks passed. Then, one afternoon, my phone rang. It was Dad. He never really called me. Even growing up, he'd let mom handle most things. So when I saw his name pop up, I hesitated. But I answered. "Hey, Dad," I said. His voice was stiff, annoyed. "Aaron," he said, "why is the mortgage unpaid?" I didn't miss a beat. I just leaned back in my chair and said, "Ask your pride and joy." Then I hung up. And that was when things started unraveling. After that call, the silence was deafening and telling. Nobody reached out. Not Mom, not Luke, not even with a half-hearted, "Hey, you okay?" It was like they expected me to crawl back the moment the consequences hit. Like my absence was just a tantrum. Temporary. They didn't understand yet. But they would. 2 days after Dad called, I got a text from Mom. No greeting, no context. Just, "We need you to sort out the mortgage before it affects our credit. Don't be childish." Childish. That was the word she chose. Not, "We're sorry," not, "Let's talk." Just a command, cold and clipped. I stared at the screen for a long time, thumb hovering. I could have said a lot. I could have let the years of resentment pour out in one long message. But I didn't. I left it on read and put my phone down. If they wanted to pretend I was just a cog in their machine, fine. Let's see how they function without me. The fallout came slower than I expected, but it came. I started hearing things through extended family, mostly from my cousin Rachel, who lived a few blocks from my parents. She called me one night with a nervous laugh. Just a heads up, your mom's been telling people you've been going through something. That you're not well lately." My stomach sank. "Not well." I repeated. "Yeah," she said carefully. "Mental health stuff. Saying you're having some kind of breakdown. That you're unstable, lashing out." I didn't believe it, obviously, but she's spinning this story like you're off the rails. I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. There it was. Classic deflection. Instead of facing the truth, they were rewriting it, casting me as the problem, making it look like I'd snapped, like I was unreliable, erratic. It was easier than admitting they'd leaned too hard for too long and finally broke the one person holding the family up. I shouldn't have been surprised, but it still stung. What really got me, though, was how they handled Christmas. It had always been at my place the past few years, mostly because I had the space and the patience. I did the decorating, cooked the dinner, bought thoughtful gifts even when money was tight. I made it feel like something. But that year, I didn't invite them. I didn't say a word. I figured they'd get the message. Instead, they held their own gathering, without telling me, and posted a bunch of smiling group photos on Facebook. Luke grinning next to Mom. Danielle holding a glass of wine by the tree I bought them last year. The caption read, "Grateful for family. Some people may leave, but the ones who matter always stick together." It hit harder than I expected. I wasn't even mad at first, just hollow, like I'd finally been cut out completely. They didn't miss me. They just patched over the space I left and kept going. But the cracks started showing not long after. Rachel called again in mid-January. "You're not gonna believe this," she said. "Luke's in trouble." I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of trouble?" "He quit his job." I blinked. "Why?" "He says he's starting his own thing. Some consulting business or something. But rumor is he got pushed out. Misused company funds or something shady. Nobody's saying the full story." That caught me off guard. Luke had always been the golden child, sure, but not exactly the responsible type. He liked appearances, nice cars, flashy watches, designer suits. I'd quietly wondered for years how he afforded his lifestyle without it catching up to him. Now it sounded like it finally had. I didn't say anything to Rachel at the time, but in the back of my mind, a quiet thought stirred. They're going to come knocking again. And they did. It started with a long message from Mom, unusually sweet, almost performative. "Hey honey, I know things have been tense, but family is forever. We all say things we don't mean sometimes. Can we talk? Maybe have dinner soon? I'll make that roast you like." I didn't reply. 2 days later came another message, this one from Dad, clipped again. "We're going through a rough patch. Mortgage is 2 months behind now. Your mother's upset. Can you please help us out, just this once?" I stared at my screen and just laughed. Just this once? I'd been helping out for years, silently, without thanks, without recognition. And now, after being called a burden and cast aside like some bitter embarrassment, they wanted me to step in again, just this once. What struck me more than anything was how little they seemed to understand what they'd done. To them, I was still the fallback plan, the quiet one, the helper. They didn't realize that the silence wasn't temporary, that I wasn't coming back. Still, They kept pushing. Luke called one night. I didn't answer, so he left a voicemail. I listened to it once, then again, just to be sure I heard what I thought I did. Hey, Aaron. Look, I know things got out of hand, but, you've always been good with money. And I've got this business idea that could really take off. I just need a little startup capital. Thought maybe you'd want in on the ground floor. Like an investment. Win-win, you know. I sat in stunned silence. It wasn't even an apology. Not a real one. Just a pitch. Like I was a venture capitalist, not his brother. Like he hadn't laughed in my face at Thanksgiving while I quietly carried the weight of his parents' financial stability. Something in me shifted after that call. I'd been quiet, but it wasn't just about hurt anymore. It was about clarity. I saw them now for what they were, and more importantly, what I wasn't to them. I wasn't family. I was a resource. And the moment I stopped being useful, they rewrote the story to cast me as the problem. But now I wasn't just done. I was done playing nice. And that's when I started making a plan. I didn't rush the plan. I'm not the dramatic type. I've never been the one to yell, to throw things, to storm out and demand people see my worth. No, I preferred quiet exits, silent steps, and then letting the silence speak for itself. But when someone tries to make a villain out of you just because you finally stopped bleeding for them, it starts to dig at something deeper. You start realizing that silence alone won't do it. Not this time. The betrayal, the one that changed everything, came about a week after Luke's voicemail. I was at work, sitting at my desk going through reports, when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost let it ring out, but something told me to pick up. Aaron Miller? The voice asked. Male, polite, but firm. Speaking. This is Kevin Brooks with Lakeshore Lending. We're calling to follow up regarding your recent mortgage application. I froze. I'm sorry, what application? The man paused. I heard the rustling of paper. This is the application submitted on January 11th. For a new loan on 324 Linton Avenue. That's your listed residence, yes? I leaned back slowly in my chair, the air feeling thick around me. That was my address. My house. Hold on, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't submit any application. More silence. Then Kevin asked, carefully, you didn't authorize Luke Miller as a co-signer on this application? My stomach turned. No, I did not. I asked him to send over the documentation. He agreed. I hung up and sat there, stunned, staring at my desk without blinking. 10 minutes later, the email hit my inbox. Attached was a scanned PDF, and when I opened it, my name and information were all over the loan documents, along with Luke's. Forged signature. Forged income statement. He even submitted my bank information, accounts I hadn't shared with anyone in years. And most insulting of all, the intended use of funds box had been checked as capital for family business venture. I saw red. He didn't just try to use my generosity. He tried to steal from me. He tried to put my house up to fund some doomed idea. The same house I worked overtime to afford. The same house they all conveniently forgot existed when they called me a burden. It was like the years of being overlooked, dismissed, and manipulated collapsed into that one moment. Like every time I let something slide, every time I swallowed my pride and did what they needed, had brought me to this exact betrayal. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just sat there, still, numb. The way you feel after a car crash, when your body is fine, but your brain hasn't caught up yet. Then, slowly, I opened a new browser tab. I started with an email to my lawyer, a woman named Marissa I'd used a couple years ago for something work-related. I wasn't even sure she'd take a personal case, but I laid it all out. The forged documents, the bank info, the unauthorized loan application. I sent the PDF. I attached screenshots. I included the voicemail from Luke. Within 20 minutes, she responded. I can help. First step is locking down your credit. Second step is reporting this to the authorities. Third step is deciding how loud you want to be. That last line stuck with me. How loud do I want to be? I'd spent my whole life quiet, avoiding scenes, choosing peace over confrontation. But now they'd gone too far. Luke had tried to tie me into debt without asking. My parents had painted me as unstable to cover their own neglect. And when I stopped giving, they didn't ask why. They just demanded more. No, this time I'd be loud. I'd be undeniable. I didn't respond to anyone that weekend. I didn't answer texts, didn't pick up the phone. I spent the entire time going through old receipts, bank records, and emails. I built a timeline, Every payment I'd made for my parents, every mortgage deposit, every expense I'd covered. I labeled them, dated them, organized them into a clean folder. I wanted a paper trail so clean it could cut glass. Monday morning, I filed a police report for attempted identity theft and fraud. I handed everything over to Marissa, who drafted a cease and desist for Luke, legally barring him from using or accessing any of my financial records or personal information. She also added a clause to protect my house from any further activity without my explicit written consent. And just for good measure, I froze all my credit accounts, changed every password I had, set up two-factor authentication on everything. Luke wasn't getting near anything I owned again. 3 days later, I got a call from Luke. This time I answered. "Aaron," he said, like we were old friends. "Hey, listen, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Save it." He stopped. "What?" "I know what you did. I have the documents. The bank called me directly. I've already filed the report, and you're going to be hearing from my lawyer." There was a pause, then a nervous laugh. "Dude, come on. It wasn't like that. I needed a little help, man. I figured we'd both benefit. It's not like I was going to mess you over or anything." "You already did," I said flatly. "You just didn't expect to get caught." "Okay, look," he said, tone shifting fast. "Let's just be real for a second, all right? You've always had help. You live alone. No kids, no real responsibilities. You can afford to float some cash. I'm trying to build something. You're just sitting there. Why not do something that actually matters for once?" That was the moment I realized he really believed it. He wasn't just manipulative. He genuinely thought he was entitled to my life, my money, my home. Because in his mind, he mattered more. I was just the quiet one, the background character, the fallback plan. I hung up without another word. That was when the real fallout began. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've had in years. Not because of what Luke did. By then, I'd already locked everything down. I wasn't in danger of losing my house, and my finances were safe. No, the real weight came from something deeper, something colder. I hadn't realized how much I still wanted to believe my family would come around. That maybe, after everything, they'd see what they had done. Maybe they'd apologize. Maybe I'd hear my dad say something, anything, about how wrong it was, about how far things had gone. But the silence told me everything I needed to know. No one called to ask what really happened. No one reached out to say, "We're sorry Luke did that." Instead, they doubled down. Rachel called again, her voice tight and low like she didn't want to be overheard. "Aaron, just so you know, your mom's telling everyone you're trying to get Luke arrested. She said you're making it all up to get back at the family." I didn't even respond. I just stood there in my living room, holding my phone, staring out the window. It was a gray, overcast day. One of those afternoons where the world feels like it's holding its breath. But inside, something had deflated in me completely. They weren't just excusing Luke. They were painting me as the villain again, because it was easier than admitting they'd failed me. Easier than admitting they'd been leaning on me like a crutch for years, then kicked me when I stopped walking for them. I started skipping meals. Not on purpose. I'd just lose track of time, then realize it was 10 p.m. and I hadn't eaten all day. My sleep got patchy. Some nights I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, going over every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every time I'd smiled through a hurt just to keep the peace. The thing that broke me wasn't even a dramatic moment. It was a Wednesday morning. I opened the fridge, saw a half-empty carton of eggs and stale bread, and realized I didn't have the energy to make anything. So I just sat on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinet, and stared at nothing for almost an hour. That was my low point. My quiet rock bottom. Not crying. Not yelling. Just empty. I didn't want revenge in that moment. I didn't even want closure. I just wanted to not care anymore. I wanted to erase the need for their approval, to finally accept that it was never coming. That nothing I did would ever be enough for them, because they never actually wanted me to succeed. They just wanted me to stay in place. Useful, invisible, silent. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I packed a bag, got in my car, and drove out to the lake. There's a cabin out there, small, tucked between tall pines, with a crooked little dock that creaks when you walk on it. It used to belong to my grandfather. He left it to me when he passed, probably because I was the only one who ever visited him. I hadn't been out there in almost 2 years. No cell service. No noise. Just wind and water and the sound of birds cutting across the trees. I stayed for 3 days. Didn't tell anyone. Didn't bring my laptop. Just a notepad, some books, and a thermos full of coffee. I sat by the water, walked the trails, let my brain settle. And slowly, without even trying, the plan started to take shape. Not one of revenge, but of release. I'd been holding on to this idea of family for so long. Like if I just proved myself enough, they'd see me, love me, be proud. But that version of family didn't exist, at least not with them. And so I started thinking about how to walk away, not out of spite, but out of necessity. When I got back home, I began making changes. First, I took my name off everything connected to my parents. No more emergency contacts, no shared financial accounts, nothing that could tie me to them. I contacted the bank and made sure they flagged any future attempts at joint applications or requests under my name. I also gave Marissa, my lawyer, power of attorney to act on my behalf for any related matters. She was more than happy to help, especially now that things were escalating. Then, I quietly started looking at job transfers. My company had branches out of state, one in Oregon, one in Colorado. I didn't tell anyone yet. I just wanted to see what it would be like to start fresh, to live where no one knew me as the disappointing son or the background brother. I wasn't rushing it. I wasn't making some big announcement. But for the first time, I felt like I was building something for me. Still, as I took steps to leave them behind, I knew it couldn't end like this. Not completely. Not without the truth coming out. Because they were still out there, telling people I was unstable, that I was the problem, that I'd abandoned my poor, struggling family after all they'd done for me. And that lie, I couldn't let that stand. So I waited. I stayed quiet. But behind the scenes, I was preparing the final move. Because the moment would come when they'd push one step too far, again. When they'd try something new. And when they did, I'd be ready. It didn't happen overnight. But slowly, piece by piece, I started putting my life back together. Only this time, I was building it on my own terms. No guilt, no obligation. Just quiet, deliberate choices made for myself and no one else. The first real shift came from work. I'd been in the same role for 5 years, project analyst for a logistics company. I liked it well enough, but I'd never really pushed for more. Always kept my head down. Always took the extra assignments without complaint, just like I had at home. But after everything that had happened, something in me clicked. I stopped waiting for someone to notice my work and started speaking up. I pitched a new client retention model during a team meeting, something I'd been fiddling with in my free time for months. Our regional manager loved it. Within a few weeks, I was presenting it to the executive team. A month later, they offered me a position in their new office in Portland, Oregon, a bump in title, a bump in salary, and best of all, a relocation package. I didn't say yes immediately. Not because I wasn't interested, I was. But I needed to know I was doing it for the right reason. I spent a weekend walking through my apartment, touching every drawer, every photo frame, every quiet reminder of who I used to be. The son who paid and stayed, waiting for some ounce of appreciation that never came. And by Sunday night, I opened my laptop, drafted the acceptance email, and hit send. Just like that, I had a fresh start. I sold my house within 3 weeks. It went for above asking price. The market was hot, and I'd taken care of the place better than most. I didn't tell my parents I was moving. Not that it mattered. The only time I'd heard from them since the fraud incident was a vague, passive-aggressive voicemail from Mom. Hope you're happy now. Your father's blood pressure's been through the roof. We'll just have to figure things out without you. I deleted it without responding. The move itself felt surreal, like I was shedding skin. The drive up the coast was long, but oddly peaceful. 700 miles of fresh air and distance between me and everything that used to drag me down. The Portland office was modern, bright, and full of people who didn't know a thing about my past. I wasn't the quiet one here. I was the guy with the retention model that saved the company $1.2 million in Q2. People asked for my opinion. My manager looped me in on high-level meetings. I started mentoring new hires. For the first time in my adult life, I felt seen. And with that visibility came leverage. I started a side hustle, something I'd been thinking about for a while. I built a website that helped small businesses automate their delivery logistics using simplified tools I'd developed over the years. I didn't expect much from it, but within 6 months, I had a dozen clients and more than enough extra income to feel the weight of financial fear lift entirely off my shoulders. I joined a hiking group, started seeing a therapist, Took a pottery class, of all things. I wasn't trying to find myself. I was just finally giving myself permission to be something beyond what my family told me I was. And with each step, my confidence grew. But so did my clarity. The more distance I gained, the more obvious the pattern became. My parents weren't just toxic, they were dependent on controlling the narrative. As long as I was quiet, they could paint themselves as the loving, self-sacrificing parents who were being mistreated by their ungrateful son. Luke was the success story. I was the failure who got weird and distant. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly predict, was that I'd been documenting everything. Emails, voicemails, bank statements, text messages, all neatly organized in a cloud folder. And with my lawyer's help, I'd filed a civil complaint for attempted fraud and identity theft. It was slow-moving, legal stuff always is, but it was real. And eventually, Luke would be served. But that wasn't even the part that excited me anymore. No, what I was really waiting for was the moment they'd try to rope me back in again. Because they would. People like that always do. They'd wait until the financial strain hit again. Until Luke's next big venture failed. Until Dad's blood pressure became more than a voicemail weapon. Then they'd reach out, full of syrupy apologies and desperate charm. And this time, I wouldn't just ignore them. This time, I'd answer. But not as the silent son they used to rely on. Not as the fallback plan. I'd answer as the man who no longer needed them. Who had built his life up from their rubble and stood taller than they ever expected. And I wouldn't just walk away. I'd burn the bridge they built. But first, I waited. And as I waited, I got stronger. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't about what you do. It's about who you become. And I was becoming someone they would never recognize. Or control. And they had no idea what was coming next. It was early spring when the opportunity finally came. Not with a bang, but with a casual email buried in a pile of spam. The subject line read, Miller Family Mortgage, Urgent Inquiry. At first, I thought it was junk. I almost deleted it. But then I saw the sender, an assistant manager from a small regional bank back home. That got my attention. I opened it, read it twice, then sat back in my chair, quietly stunned. The message was short. It said there had been a delinquency reported on a property I had previously been associated with, and they were reaching out because my name had been listed as a prior financial contributor on the account. The address was familiar, my parents' house. The same one I'd paid the mortgage on for years. The same one I'd stopped paying after Thanksgiving. I called the bank directly. The woman who answered, polite but clearly overworked, confirmed what I suspected. The house was in pre-foreclosure. Payments hadn't been made in over 4 months. The balance had ballooned with late fees. She asked if I had any intention of assisting in bringing the loan current. I smiled and said no, but I might be able to help in another way. Because that email? That wasn't just a warning, it was a window. A small crack in the wall they'd tried to build without me. And behind it, I could see everything starting to crumble. I reached out to Marissa the same day. She pulled the public records and confirmed the foreclosure notice had been filed. Even better, the bank had sent multiple notifications, which meant the clock was ticking. The property would be listed for auction within 60 days. And that's when it clicked. They were going to lose the house. The house they always said would be passed down to Luke someday. The house Mom had once called our legacy. The house I kept afloat for years while they treated me like a live-in ATM with no emotional value. And now, it was about to be taken. Unless someone stepped in. Unless someone bought it. That's when the idea began to grow. It started as a flicker, a petty thought, a quiet what if. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't about revenge anymore. Not entirely. It was about closure. About taking back something they'd always dangled over me like a prize I'd never earn. And this time, I wouldn't just earn it. I'd own it. I had the means. Between my new salary and the steady income from my side business, I was in the strongest financial position I'd ever been in. I reached out to a realtor friend in Portland, explained the situation, and asked if she could help me quietly monitor the foreclosure process. She was curious, maybe a little concerned, but agreed. Then I dug deeper. Rachel, bless her soul, still kept in touch. She didn't know the full extent of everything. I didn't want to drag her into it, but she knew just enough to keep me updated. One night, she called and told me something that made the entire picture snap into focus. So, Luke's back living with your parents, she said. His startup's gone. Danielle left. Apparently, he was borrowing money from everyone. Friends, old coworkers, even mom and dad. They're broke, Aaron. I leaned back in my chair, nodding slowly. Are they selling anything? Not yet. But your mom was at church last weekend whispering about needing a miracle. Whatever that means. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in the quiet for a long time. It was time. I contacted a local investment group that specialized in acquiring distressed properties. I didn't use my name, just a shell LLC I'd set up months ago for tax purposes. Marissa helped with the paperwork. The plan was simple. When the house went to auction, my group would bid. Discreetly, quietly, and when the dust settled, I'd be the owner. But that wasn't all. As I moved the pieces into place, another document surfaced, one I'd almost forgotten about. A notarized statement I'd had drafted years ago when I first started helping with the mortgage. It laid out my financial contributions, signed by my parents, acknowledging that I had covered over $90,000 in payments and repairs as a gesture of goodwill and support. Marissa reviewed it and smiled. If they ever contest your purchase or try to claim the property was unjustly taken, this will bury them. It wasn't just a receipt. It was protection, leverage, proof that I wasn't some estranged son trying to steal the family home. I was the one who'd saved it until they turned on me. Now, I was simply reclaiming what they'd thrown away. I took the final step. I arranged to fly back home the week before the auction. Not to stir drama, just to be there, to watch, to see, with my own eyes, the moment they realized their golden son wouldn't be the one rescuing them. Because I was done being quiet. This time, I wasn't just walking away. I was walking back in, but on my terms. And they weren't going to see it coming. The flight home felt surreal. It had been nearly a year since I left, since I'd packed up my life and driven 700 miles north, swearing I'd never look back. Now, here I was, sitting by the window of a half-empty plane, watching the city I'd outgrown creep back into view. But I wasn't the same man they remembered, and I wasn't coming back to make peace. The auction was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Small courthouse event. Nothing flashy, just rows of stiff chairs, a wooden podium, and a bank-appointed auctioneer going through a list of properties like he was reading off overdue library books. I showed up early, dressed clean, dark jeans, pressed shirt, blazer. Unassuming but sharp. I sat in the back, quiet, unnoticed. The bidding started slow. I waited. When the house came up, 4131, Willow Bend Lane, 3-bed, 2-bath, the same one I'd covered for years. The auctioneer barely raised his voice. Starting at $242,000. Do I hear 242? One bidder raised his hand. A woman I didn't recognize. Probably a flipper. Do I hear 245? My agent, the one I sent in under the LLC, raised her paddle. Calm, confident. 245. Thank you. Do I hear 250? Another bidder joined. Then it became a mild back and forth. A few nods, a few counters. No drama. Until 260 hit. That's when the other bidders backed down. The room got quiet again. 260 going once, twice, sold. The gavel came down. Just like that, it was mine. My house. Or at least, the house I paid for. The house they pretended was never mine. The house they said would belong to Luke because he'd have a family someday. That house now belonged to my LLC. And they didn't have a clue. I didn't show up at the house that day. I wasn't looking for a confrontation. Not yet. I wanted the paperwork processed first. Deed transferred, locks changed, all of it buttoned up and clean. That took about 9 days. 9 days where I stayed in a quiet hotel just outside town, walking by the lake, sipping black coffee in the mornings, sleeping like I hadn't in years. 9 days while the storm quietly brewed in their lives. Rachel texted me on day 7. Luke's freaking out. Got some notice taped to the front door. Your mom ripped it off, but she's been crying ever since. They don't know what's happening. They thought they had more time. I didn't reply. On day 10, the sheriff delivered the final notice to vacate. And that night, I went to the house. Not to gloat. Not yet. Just to look. I parked across the street, engine off, headlights dimmed. It was dark outside, late enough that the neighborhood was quiet. The porch light was still on. Through the front window, I could see my mother sitting at the kitchen table, shoulders hunched, hand wrapped around a mug like it could anchor her. Luke stood behind her, pacing. My dad sat stiff and silent, looking older than I remembered. I watched them like strangers. And in a way, that's what they were now. They had no idea they were sitting in my house. The next morning, my property manager hand-delivered the final document, a formal notice of ownership and intent to renovate the property, effective immediately. Inside was a personalized letter, carefully worded by my lawyer. It read, "This property is now under new ownership. All prior occupants must vacate by Friday. There will be no further extensions and no exceptions. We recommend securing alternate housing immediately." It was signed by me, not as Aaron, but as the managing partner of the LLC. I didn't plan on seeing them, but fate, or karma, had other ideas. The following day, I was walking out of a bakery downtown when I saw them. All three of them, Mom, Dad, Luke, standing outside a bank across the street, huddled together like a storm-battered flock. Mom looked pale and frantic. Dad was rubbing his forehead. Luke was on the phone, barking into it, red-faced. I don't know if it was the bank denying them another loan or the landlord of whatever rental they were begging for, but they looked completely untethered. For the first time, they looked like the ones who didn't belong. I stayed across the street. I didn't wave. I didn't approach, but I did make eye contact with my mother. For one long second, she froze when she saw me. Her lips parted like she might say something, but she didn't. She just stared, as if she wasn't sure if I was real or some ghost from a past she'd never imagined would come back with power. I held her gaze, gave her the smallest nod, then turned and walked away. That night, I got a text. It was from a number I didn't recognize at first, but I knew the tone instantly. "Why are you doing this to us? We're still your family." I didn't reply right away. I let it sit. Then, after a full day passed, I wrote back, "No, you were my family. And then you showed me what that meant to you. This is me finally listening." They never responded. 2 days later, they were gone. No forwarding address. No farewell. The house was empty. And for the first time in years, so was the weight on my chest. I walked through the empty house the following week. It was quiet, eerily so. The kind of quiet that clings to walls after years of noise and memories. But this time, the silence didn't sting. It felt clean, like the end of something heavy. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon and old coffee, even though all the furniture was gone. They'd taken what they could. The table, the cheap art on the walls, the old recliner in the living room that Dad used to doze off in every night. But they left behind the photos. Faded school portraits of Luke. Graduation shots. A family Christmas picture from 15 years ago, where I was half cut off on the side of the frame. I found a dusty shoebox in the back of a closet with my name on it. Inside were childhood drawings, a couple of old report cards, and one wrinkled thank you note I'd written my mom in 3rd grade after she packed my favorite lunch. She'd kept it, apparently, or maybe she just forgot it was there. I didn't take it with me. I left it in the box. Because that version of me, the one who craved their love, who tried to earn a place at the table by paying the bills and swallowing the insults, he didn't live here anymore. I closed the box, and then I locked the door. Word got around. I didn't spread it. I didn't need to. This town ran on whispers and backyard fences, and it didn't take long for people to piece together what had happened. Rachel told me that my mother started telling people I'd tricked them, that I'd stolen the house while they were vulnerable. But the truth had receipts, bank notices, court filings, a paper trail so long and sharp it cut through every lie they tried to spin. And the best part? It wasn't just about the house anymore. Luke's fraud case moved forward. The forged loan documents, the identity theft attempt, it all caught up with him. My lawyers submitted everything to the authorities. The investigation was quiet, but thorough. A few months later, I got a message from the county clerk's office. Luke had taken a plea deal. Fines, probation, and a permanent mark on his record. Nothing dramatic, no orange jumpsuits or breaking news. But it would follow him for the rest of his career. The golden boy had finally learned what it meant to fall. As for my parents, they moved in with one of my mom's cousins out of state. A small place, shared with another family member. Rachel said they hated it. No privacy, no control, no pedestal to stand on. They tried reaching out once more. An envelope mailed to my new address, handwritten, begging for reconciliation. I didn't open it. I dropped it in the shredder without reading a word. Because forgiveness isn't owed. It's earned. And they never tried to earn it. Not once. 6 months later, the house was fully renovated. I didn't move back in. I turned it into a transitional home, a place for young adults aging out of foster care who needed a safe start. I partnered with a local nonprofit, set up a trust in my grandfather's name, and quietly began funding it from the income of my growing business. That house had once been a symbol of control, of shame, of who they believed deserved what. Now, it was a second chance for someone who never got one. I visited once, late in the evening, after the new residents had moved in. The porch light was on. Laughter drifted out through the windows. Warm, alive, real. I stood on the curb and took a deep breath. Then I smiled, because the house no longer carried their legacy. It carried mine, and I built it with everything they tried to take from me.